Kenneth adjusted his tie as he stepped out of the car, his mind already racing with the tasks awaiting him at the office. As a consultant for a major oil company, his days were long and demanding. But no matter how busy he was, his heart always softened at the thought of his family, Helen, his beautiful wife of 2 years, and their 9-month-old son, Chidi. Kenneth was always busy with work. As a consultant for a big oil company, he spent most of his days in meetings, traveling to different cities, or working late at the office. But no matter how busy he was, his favorite time was always coming home to his wife, Helen, and their 9-month-old son, Chidi. Chidi was the light of their lives, but since his birth, he had been in and out of hospitals. His health was always fragile, and every time Helen thought he was getting better, something new would come up. She had spent so many sleepless nights by his side, watching him struggle to breathe, praying for a miracle. The doctors didn't have answers, and their visits to the hospital had drained their savings. One weekend, they were invited to a family get-together at Kenneth's elder brother's house. Everyone was happy to see each other, sharing stories, laughing, and enjoying the delicious food. Kenneth's brother, Mr. Chidi, was known for his generosity, and his house was always filled with warmth and laughter. Helen was relieved to be around family, hoping it would lift her spirits. As the evening wore on, Helen noticed Chidi looking pale. He was restless in her arms, and his small cries grew louder. Helen's heart sank. She had seen this before. Panic spread quickly as the family realized something was wrong. Kenneth's sister shouted for someone to get the car while others gathered Chidi's things. They rushed him to Mr. Chidi's private clinic, where a team of doctors worked to stabilize him. Helen sat in the waiting room, trembling with fear. Kenneth paced back and forth, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. The minutes felt like hours. Finally, Dr. Ibuka, the family doctor, walked out with a grave look on his face. "I'm afraid Chidi needs a blood transfusion immediately," Dr. Ibuka said, his voice steady but serious. "And there's something else you need to know." Helen's stomach dropped. She clutched Kenneth's arm as the doctor continued, "Your son is a sickler. He has sickle cell anemia. We need to find a donor quickly." The words hit Kenneth like a punch to the chest. "Sickler? How is that possible?" he asked, his voice rising. Helen is as. This doesn't make sense." Helen's lips quivered, but she said nothing. The family, stunned into silence, exchanged nervous glances. Kenneth wasn't convinced. He decided to take Chidi's blood sample to other hospitals for further tests. Each time, the result was the same. Chidi was a sickler. Confusion turned to suspicion. Kenneth couldn't ignore the nagging questions in his mind. That night, as Chidi lay in the hospital recovering, Kenneth called for a family meeting. Helen's parents were invited, along with Kenneth's siblings. Helen sat in the middle of the room, her hands trembling as the weight of their stares pressed down on her. Kenneth's voice was calm but cold. "Helen, I need to know the truth. How is Chidi a sickler?" Helen burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely able to speak. "It happened during my bridal shower. Obina, my ex, he was there. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I was weak. We had a one-night stand. I never thought. I didn't know." The room fell silent. Kenneth stared at her, his face pale. His family was shocked, and Helen's parents were too stunned to speak. Kenneth stood up and walked out of the room without a word. The betrayal was too much to bear. The family left, agreeing to give Kenneth and Helen space to decide their future. But in the quiet of the night, as Helen sat alone with her son, she wondered if she had lost everything she held dear. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Kenneth avoided Helen, leaving the house early and returning late. He couldn't look her in the eyes without feeling a wave of anger and hurt. Helen, on the other hand, spent every moment with Chidi, holding him close, as if afraid he might slip away. Chidi was still weak, and the doctors insisted on regular checkups. Kenneth continued to pay for everything without question, but his distance from Helen was unmistakable. Helen tried to talk to him, to explain, but every time she approached him, he would shake his head and walk away. One evening, as Kenneth sat alone in his car outside the house, he received a call from his elder brother, Mr. Chidiok. "Kenneth, you can't keep running away from this," Chidiok said. "The boy needs you. Helen needs you. You need to decide what you want to do." Kenneth sighed heavily. "How can I look at her, knowing she betrayed me? How can I be a father to a child who isn't mine?" Chidiok's voice softened. "I know you're hurt, but that little boy didn't choose this. He only knows you as his father. He needs you to fight for him. This is bigger than what Helen did." Kenneth hung up without replying. He knew his brother was right, but the pain of betrayal felt like a mountain he couldn't climb. The next morning, Helen woke up to find Kenneth in Chidi's room. He was sitting by the crib, watching the boy sleep. She stood in the doorway, unsure of what to say. "Kenneth," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't turn to face her. "I'm staying for Chidi. But don't think for a second that this fixes what you've done." Tears streamed down Helen's face as she nodded. She knew it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. As the weeks went by, Kenneth threw himself into being a father. He took Chidi to his doctor's appointments, read books about sickle cell anemia, and even joined a support group for parents of sicklers. His dedication to Chidi grew stronger with each passing day. But things between Kenneth and Helen remained tense. They spoke only when necessary, and the love that once filled their home was now replaced with an icy distance. Helen was determined to earn Kenneth's trust again, but she didn't know where to start. One evening, as they sat together in silence, Helen broke the quiet. "I want to do a DNA test for Chidi," she said. Kenneth looked at her, surprised. "Why? We already know the truth." Helen shook her head. "I just need to be sure. For myself. For us. Please." Reluctantly, Kenneth agreed. They went to the hospital the next day, and the test was done. The results would take a week, and the wait was agonizing. Helen couldn't sleep, her mind racing with fears of what the test might reveal. When the results finally arrived, Kenneth opened the envelope with trembling hands. Helen stood beside him, clutching his arm. The words on the page were clear: Kenneth was not Chidi's biological father. Helen collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Kenneth stared at the paper, his emotions a storm of anger, sadness, and confusion. "I knew it," he said quietly, his voice filled with bitterness. "I knew." Helen reached for him, but he stepped back. "Don't," he said sharply. "You've taken everything from me. Everything." He turned and walked out the door, leaving Helen alone with her grief. As Kenneth walked away, Helen sat on the floor, her heart shattered. The truth was undeniable, and yet it only deepened the wounds in their marriage. Kenneth's anger was like a wall she couldn't break, and no matter how much she tried, it seemed like there was no way back to the love they once shared. But in the quiet of her thoughts, Helen knew that her love for Chidi would never change. He was her son, and she would fight for him, even if it meant facing the consequences of her mistakes alone. Kenneth, too, was left with an overwhelming choice. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with questions about forgiveness, betrayal, and the future. He had tried to move on, tried to shield his heart from the pain, but deep down, he knew he couldn't walk away from his son, not when Chidi needed him most. The family that had once been filled with joy was now fractured, each person struggling with their own guilt and heartache. The story ended without resolution, leaving room for the future to unfold. Would Kenneth ever forgive Helen? Could they rebuild their family? Or would the secrets of the past forever cast a shadow over their lives? Only time would tell. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, please share your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more amazing content. See you in the next video.